What's up, everybody? Welcome to the show. We're recording live here in Park City, Utah for the 10th annual Winter Adventure and Mastermind. I was going to say Winter Summer for some reason. We've got one of the speakers at the event that's coming up, a very significant individual with some incredible accolades. His name is Mick Ebeling. He is an author, an entrepreneur, a philanthropist, an executive producer, winner of the 2014 Muhammad Ali Humanitarian of the Year Award, and he's won the Time Magazine he's listed in the Time Magazine Top Invention of the Year category two times, which a lot more layers to that you can discuss as we go through, but welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here. So let's start with a little bit of backstory so the audience gets to know you a little bit, kind of where you're from, and take us up through all of these things that you've done.
Sure. Born in California, grew up in Arizona, spent a couple years in the Air Force at the Air Force Academy. I always say I proudly served my country playing basketball. Moved out to California and then moved back to California and then never left. Got into production and animation and design, had a multinational production company. We had offices all over the world. We were doing really, really fun stuff. You know, in animation design, the Super Bowl of animation is the James Bond main title sequence. And we secured that and things were going awesome. And then all of a sudden one day my wife and I got invited to this gallery event where we met or were exposed to this paralyzed graffiti artist. He had ALS and Lou Gehrig's disease. And something about his story and meeting his father and brother just kind of spoke to me and just was that almost like a rock in your shoes you can't quite get rid of. And so that was in the springtime. Holidays rolled around. We decided to, instead of doing kind of what we typically did in production and design and animation, or entertainment, is, you know, giving people $150 bottles of booze or tickets to the stuff. We said, why not? It was my wife's idea. She said, why don't we instead make a donation to that paralyzed artist? And so that's what we did. We sat down with his father and brother, who were the stewards of his foundation, and said, hey, we want to give you this money. What are you going to use it for? And they said, we just want to talk to our son and our brother again. And I went, some people might get this reference, but what you talking about with us, right?
I remember that.
Yeah. And I said, well, how do you talk now? And they said, we talk through a piece of paper. We have a piece of paper with the alphabet on it, and we run our finger along it. And when our finger gets to the letter that my brother wants, he blinks. And then we write it down. And then we start again, finger, letter, blink, finger, letter, blink. So he said, it's a pain. If he blinks at the wrong time, if I blink at the wrong time, everything goes south. And so I kind of sat there for a second and was like, what? I live in Los Angeles. This is 13 miles away from where I live. We have a GMP greater than most developing nations.
Right.
And this dude, because his parents didn't make the right amount of money or didn't have the right health insurance, he's forced to talk through a piece of paper when people literally in the hospital rooms next to him were talking with these devices, what I called them Stephen Hawking machines, right?
Oh, sure.
Because we've all seen either, videos or shows or articles about Stephen Hawking moving his eyes back and forth, and that's what I thought was ubiquitous, because I don't have anybody in my family with any kind of trapped-in syndrome. And that's not the case. And so on a dime, I pivoted. I went, all right, here's the deal. I'm going to get you one of those Stephen Hawking machines.
Yeah.
And it was funny because they looked at me nicely, and then they looked at the check, and they looked back at me, and they said, no, you're not. You don't have enough money to get one of those Stephen Hawking machines. And I was like, guys, I'm a producer. I make people do shit they shouldn't do all the time. We got this. We're going to figure this out.
Yeah.
And so they got fired up, and I was watching them get fired up, and then I got kind of taken into kind of caught up in the moment. I said, well, wait a second. If we can figure out if there's a way for him to talk with his eyes, why don't we figure out how to hack that same machine and figure out how to make it so he can draw with his eyes? What if he could draw with his eyes? And they said, you can do that? And I didn't answer because the answer was no. I didn't know how to do it, but I didn't say no. And they thought that was a yes, and they left, and it took about a year to build a team, but flew people from all around the world. They came into my house. My wife and kids and I moved out. They all moved in. We moved the tables and chairs against the wall. We went crazy for about 2.5 weeks. And in the end, we ended up creating this thing called the EyeWriter, which is cheap sunglasses from the Venice Beach Boardwalk, a coat hanger, zip ties, duct tape, web camera, some really good code, plug it into the computer, put the glasses on him, and he could draw again. And so with his family and friends gathered watching this, we kind of unveiled this thing, and it was at his hospital room. It was late at night. He was upstairs on the 4th floor. We set up a wireless signal down to the parking lot, connected that to this massive projector that would project against the wall, or against the side of a building. And for the first time in 7 years, this dude who had been lying motionless in the bed drew again for the first time.
No shit.
And so that your reaction was this moment where I was just, and everybody on the team, everybody around me, and my family was there. We were like, oh my God, what just happened? It was this rising from the ashes, this amazing moment where this dude who had had all of his freedom ripped away from him from this horrific disease was not only communicating with his family, but he was doing what he loved again. And so we were like, that's amazing. And then we all went out for beers to celebrate. And then we all went home. And then everyone flew home.
Yeah.
And then we woke up. And all of a sudden, everybody from around the world was coming and talking to us. It got Time Magazine's, our first Time Magazine Top Invention, TED Talks. And I always wanted to do a TED Talk. I had no idea what to talk about. But now all of a sudden that. And it was one thing after another. And so that was this moment where I went, well, maybe this is what I should do with my life. Maybe I should use what we now call technology for the sake of humanity. Make technology that makes the world a better place and that helps people. And the funny thing about that is I was thinking about it and praying about it and meditating about it, talking to mentors about it. And I made the decision not to.
Interesting.
I'm not going to do it. I got lucky. Just enjoy your Andy Warhol 15 minutes of fame. And almost the moment I made that decision, I got an email from the artist. And the email said, that was the first time I've drawn anything for 7 years. I feel like I've been held underwater and someone finally reached down and pulled my head up so I could take a breath. When you get an email like that, what do? You're like, all right, this is what we're doing. And so that was the moment, that very moment when I read that email, that was the moment that Not Impossible Labs began.
I want to come back to that because there's a lot in that moment that I'm really curious about. But one thing that's in my mind as you talked about it was, so you're a producer, you're creative, I guess, right? You're doing creative work. That's the way I'm taking it anyway, right?
Producers manage the creative process. They're not the ones that are doing the creative. They're the ones, that's what an executive producer is. They're the ones that oversee it. They make it happen. If a wall or a speed bump gets in the way, they move it out of the way to allow the creative process to happen.
Where did technology, I mean, you're in the technology space now. Is that just something you've always been invested in? Like, how did you become?
No, that's what I'm saying, man. This is an accident. This is a total accident. Being in animation and design, you work on really powerful computers, right? And so I got a chance to see the brilliance of people who would code. I mean, it's a crazy thing, but people will code to make things pretty, right? Sure. It's not just to have things happen. So that exposure to technology was really my first at-bat to watch how technology works. And then I just made the assumption, having been a producer, like, all right, I don't know how the hell I'm going to do this, but I know how to build teams, and I just started to do what producers do, which you start to network and talk and research and sell people on, or not sell, you enlist people into this concept of like, what would happen if we tried to help this one dude? And people signed up.
Ultimate visionary, right? You provide that vision and people get enrolled in it. That's incredible. Yeah. That's an amazing story. So take me now to this moment of like, I decided not to, right? What do you credit? I mean, is it a belief in the universe, all of that stuff? Has this come up in other parts of your life? But like this guy sends the email the exact moment it sounds like that you're about to not do this. What do you credit that to? Is there a spiritual component? Is it just timing? I'm kind of curious where you take that.
So I believe in destiny, but I also believe very much in self-direction, right? And the saying that the harder you work, the luckier you get. I think though sometimes, and me personally and my family and friends will tell you, there's a degree of spontaneity that is kind of a F it, let's go for it. Let's see what happens. What's the worst that could happen? Yeah. And so I think in that evaluation process, I kind of looked at it and I doubted myself and I doubted that I could do this again. And I was just like, I got lucky, but enjoy it. Enjoy, as I said, and enjoy your Andy Warhol 15 minutes of fame and clip the newspaper clippings and make a little scrapbook to show your grandkids and then just get back to doing. What I was doing was incredibly successful, so there was no reason. It wasn't like I was having this consideration of like, I don't like what I'm doing. I loved what I was doing, but then all of a sudden this was exposed to me, and the power of helping somebody. There's an author named Ayn Rand. She wrote The Fountainhead, Atlas Shrugged. She wrote a lot of books like that. And she's a controversial writer, but one of the things that she always talks about is this kind of self-direction right? That we possess as human beings. But the other thing is she wrote a book called The Virtue of Selfishness. And the virtue of selfishness is the conventional definition of selfishness is what? What would you say?
Only about you.
Right.
Yeah.
Do things that make you feel good,
Right.
things that are about you. She said, how do you feel when you help another human being? How does it make you feel?
Yeah. Makes me feel great.
So she said, great. Let's flip. It's a semantical conversation.
Yeah,
but
sure.
Let's flip the words. Let's say that when you help someone, it makes you feel great. People would typically call that altruistic. Let's call that selfish. Why don't you operate your life being as selfish as you can, helping other people? Because that is just a constant adrenaline, endorphin rush of making you feel like you're actually like contributing to the world, doing some good in the world. And so that, I mean, it's a philosophical, semantical conversation, but that always stuck with me. And I think that was one of the considerations that I contemplated when this thing went down and just went, I mean, if all of a sudden, you know, who you believe in, God or the universe or whatever, gave you a magic wand and you realized that you can help people and you just set it down because you wanted to keep making animation, that was kind of the final consideration. Is when I got that email and was like, all right, that was the extra nudge that the universe gave me and said, all right, here we go. Now, I spent most of the time the next couple of years just trying to figure out how the hell I was going to pull this off.
Sure.
There was no business model associated with it. It was more of, you know, what is now a saying and a mantra, and it's on signs all over our office, it's on our t-shirts, but it's commit and then figure it out.
I love that.
And that's how we operate at Not Impossible.
I love that. So sort of, part of a saying that I use often is kind of a ready, fire, aim. Does that make sense? Right? Like some people say fire first, but it's like, no, I think you have that ready, that commit, right? And then you go, as opposed to just analyzing it to death before you make a motion. Wow, that was amazing. So tell me about the next or first project under your new company. What's the next thing? So you have this thing, you have your Andy Warhol 15 minutes of fame, and now it's like you make this decision. Okay, I'm going to go. What do you do? What's the, like, how do you find
start
the
to
next
contemplate you realize you're like, wow, I have this lightsaber. Where do I point it?
Right,
You know,
exactly.
what do I cut with this thing? And so we started doing some things and we failed, and we started some things and we failed, and we started some things and failed. And then there was this one night I was out to dinner with a friend of mine, and he said, hey, how's this Not Impossible thing going? I'm like, it's great, but you know, I haven't quite cracked the code yet. And he goes, well, do me a favor. After dinner, go home and research this guy named Dr. Tom Catena. Just trust me, write his name down, but go home and research him. I'm like, all right, cool. So I go research him. This guy blew my mind. He was a naval surgeon who became a missionary doctor. He was living in this area in Sudan called the Nuba Mountains. He's a modern day Mother Teresa. And I'm reading his story late at night, family's asleep. And it talks about the one thing that this guy hates to do. He has to do everything. Draw blood, pull teeth, deliver babies. You know, if you've got a hangnail, or if or the one thing he hates to do, or if you've got a limb hanging off, he has to fix it. And so the one thing he hates to do is perform amputations, because it's an agrarian society, and it's these people, they live off the land, and that's not just an inconvenience, that's a really debilitating thing. And so I was like, well, why is this guy performing so many amputations? So I dug into that, and the reason is because he, the current reigning president of Sudan, was constantly bombing the people of the Nuba Mountains with these horrible giant Molotov cocktails made full of jet fuel and shrapnel. And so he was constantly fixing people. So these things would hit the ground and spray shrapnel, and that would rip off limbs or it would kill people. So I'm reading this story, and you can just imagine, like, you're sitting in front of me, and I'm just leaning in a little bit further. I'm leaning in, I'm in deep now. I'm in 100%. And it talked about one particular case, one particular story of this young boy named Daniel who was tending his family's goats and cows. He heard the bombers coming. Bombers come every day. People are just used to it. Like, when the bombs come, they go hide behind rocks. They get in foxholes. It's just part of, it's like the monsoon season. It's just, that's what happens, which is sad in and of itself. Heard him coming. There was nobody. He was in the middle of an open field. There was no place for him to run or hide. He sees a tree. He runs behind a tree, wraps his arms around a tree. The bomb goes off not far from where he was. Because he was behind the tree, his body was protected from the blast, but because his arms were on the other side, it blew off his arms. So I'm scrolling through this picture. It's this thing by Alex Perry in Time, and I'm scrolling through it, and I see the image of this kid, this lying, in a gurney with no arms. And I go on reading it, and it talks about the one thing he said, the thing that when he woke up and he realized he was a double amputee, He said, if I could die, I would, which is understandable. Like, think about that. If your kids had both their arms blown off and they woke up and they realized I don't have arms, they would be, I know my kids would be like, poor me, woe is me, this is ruining my life, That would be their first response. That wasn't this kid's response. His first response was, if I could die, I would, because now I'm going to be such a burden to my family.
Wow.
His first thought was being unselfish and wanting to not be a burden to his family. And I was like, all right, God dang it. Here we go. Commit and figure it out. Woke up the next day, told my wife. She said, are we going to move out of the house again? And a bunch of strange people are moving in and we're going to start. And I said, yep, here we go again.
Here we go.
So rinse and repeat. And the crazy thing is throughout the process, fail. I mean, one of the chapters of my book is fail, 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 succeed, repeat is necessary.
Yeah.
We're going through this thing. Nothing's working. It works a little bit. It stops working. Works a little bit. We finally get to a point, but 4 months to the day that I went out to dinner with that friend of mine. So we're moving fast.
Yeah.
4 months to the day, I was in Sudan with that boy, and we figured out how to make a 3D printed arm for him and allowed him to feed himself for the first time in 2 years.
We're going to come back. You guys, there's so much in there. So first off, did he know you were doing this? Did you get in touch? Like, were you just a guy in L.A.?
Nah, I got a hold of Dr. Tom, and Dr. Tom, I said, look, I'm crazy. Don't think I'm crazy, but I am. But this is what I want to do. And he's like, awesome. We'd love to have you. He's a super generous man. And he said, yeah, whatever we can do to help you would be great. But this is, we'd love to have you come out and try to help Daniel.
Gotcha. And I have to ask, as a man who won 2 Time Magazine awards, Wired Magazine, all these different Tribeca, whatever, all these things that you're going to talk about as we go through some of the accolades that you've had. But you bring these people in, all these people into your house, your poor wife. You bring all these people into your house, right? They move in, and you're the producer. You're the guy that brings them all together and then tries to figure it out, commit, and then go, kind of thing, right? So, what's the first thing that you do in that setting? If this is like, for me as an entrepreneur trying to get advice from a very seasoned and accomplished entrepreneur, what's the first thing you do in that process? Are you speaking? Are you creating vision? Are you enrolling the team? Like, can you give me kind of the first few steps of that process?
So we live on a couple mantras, right? There's a couple founding principles for Non-Impossible Labs. One of them is help one, help many.
Yeah.
So when we don't start trying to create a 3D printed prosthetic solution that can help alleviate limb loss in remote regions. Now that's what we did.
Sure.
But if I say to you, hey, do you want to help me create a scalable 3D printed solution that can help alleviate limb loss and improve quality of life in remote, far off corners? I might get you. You might go, yeah, that sounds cool.
That sounds pretty neat.
But if I say, hey, here's this young boy named Daniel. He's 12 years old. He lost both of his hands, both of his arms. Here's his story. Here's what he said when he realized that he lost both of his arms. Do you want to help me build an arm for Daniel? The answer is going to be, fuck yeah, let's do it all day long. Let's go, right? Because now you are not thinking about the concept of building a 3D printed arm. You're thinking about a young boy named Daniel. How old are your kids?
6 and 3.
So you can relate, like, what if my kids had this happen to them? You're like, all right, I'm in. I'm in for Daniel. Now, the beautiful thing about it is and this is one of our fundamental design principles, in helping Daniel, in focusing on his needs and the circumstances around his situation, it gives you this really, really tight focus of how you're going to try to solve that problem. And in doing so, guess what happens? You end up accommodating for and learning from how to create a solution that can scale to help many people. So that's what help one, help many means. And so we always, at the beginning of every project, always start by asking ourselves the question, who is the one? Who's the one? Let's nail this. Let's really focus on this. And then we can open up the aperture and help more people.
My ignorance on this topic is where this next couple of questions come from. But double amputee, I know of prosthetics. Until I read about you, I'd never heard of a 3D printed arm. So I've heard of prosthetics. Was a prosthetic not an option? Well, let me start there. Was a prosthetic not an option? I'm sure there's fit issues or whatever. Was this determined to be really the only solution for him, and why?
So prosthetics, especially when you're talking about low-end prosthetics, they're largely cosmetic. They do very little. You can use it as like a leverage point to, you can't pick something up, but you can put it, maybe use the arm or whatever it is to lean against it. Or if it's a leg, it's almost like a cane that's attached to your stump. prosthetics are expensive. They're not hyper functional, and they're difficult to get and get to fit right. Imagine if you lived in a world where there's, you might see a car or two every couple of days, and it's usually the UN or some relief agency. We're talking remote parts of the world.
Yeah.
There's no manufacturing. Like, the manufacturing you get is what you make of yourself. The houses you live in are mud huts, and straw roofs. There's, if you're fortunate enough to live in a place where you can get some bricks or things like that, that's incredible. Right. So we had to figure out a way to make it so that you could create something that could scale. And so that was our whole vision, was how do you create something that you can actually get and make it so that it's just in time and bespoke for that particular person. So that was the principle around it.
I can't imagine 3D printed arm. Like, what functionality does he have? What functionality does he not have as a result of having these arms?
So when we built it, and we got to keep in mind, this was years ago, right? Yeah. So this was the very start. And what we built, the beautiful thing, and let me skip to the punchline on here. The way that Not Impossible works is that we always measure how can we create the most amount of impact. When we say we're making the EyeWriter, we're making the Daniel arm, or we've got a slew of other things we're working on, what's going to create the most amount of impact? Once we've decided that, then we say, what's the vehicle that's going to do that? Do we give it away open source? Do we give it to a philanthropy? Do we start a for-profit company? Yeah. And we have examples across the board in all this. So we made the decision with Daniel, with the Daniel arm, like, let's just post this thing open source. I mean, a lot of the what we got in terms of the initial tech around it was given to us through a guy named Richard Van Us. And he was doing it open source too. So in principle, it was like, you don't take something that's open source and then try to figure out how to monetize it. So what has happened since that time is kids are making these things just recreationally. Like, 3D printing has become, it was really big for a second. Now it's just ubiquitous. You don't even, it's not even as sexy as it used to be. And now it's being done for things,
hearts, I've heard, right?
You can 3D print buildings, you can 3D print, cars, you can 3D print a lot of different things. It's just another manufacturing device. So coming back around to this, our whole point on this was, how do you create something that at that particular time, this is years ago, worked for Daniel, but then how do you give it away so other people can iterate on it? And now that's exactly what happens. If you look out into the kind of the 3D printing sphere, there's stuff that blows our stuff away, and they've used some of our initial thoughts and concepts to build upon, but now it's just, people have refined it. But that's kind of the beauty, I think, of humanity, is we are constantly standing on the shoulders of our predecessors and standing on the shoulders of others. So you're building something and someone else sees it and goes, oh, wait a second, there's 75% of that's amazing, but 25% of that's lame. I'm going to try to make that better. And then they build upon that, and it gets better and better.
What do you credit? What components of your business, of Not Impossible, all of that, do you credit with the award-winning nature of all that you're doing? You've been highly recognized in many different, like, very, very prominent publications and festivals and all this stuff. What do you credit that to? What are some of the attributes that you think?
I think people just want to see people do good shit in the world. Yeah. That's what I think it is. And I think that we have become the poster child of not being focused purely on monetary gains, like very little. It's about, I think, this innate sense of good that people have, and we are that poster child. We're that representative of, like, oh my God, what happens when you just double down on trying to help someone? Look what comes out of that. And so I think that there's a hunger for that, and I think that people intuitively want to do good and not just go donate some time at the Humane Society, which is great and it's just awesome. And but people want to do good and they want to do more. So I think that that's really what has led to our success, and the fact that we are just absolutely obstinately pig-headed in this belief that nothing is impossible. And it doesn't matter your degrees, your diplomas, your credentials. It just matters your grit and your drive and your will. And if you're driven and there's a reason to do it, then you will figure it out. And I think people take a lot of inspiration from that, because I think everyone, myself included, everyone doubts themselves.
Sure.
Everyone doubts that we're worthy, that we're talented enough, that we're smart enough. Brilliant thing about Not Impossible, we don't have the degrees or the diplomas or the credentials. We don't have, there's nothing on paper that says we should be able to pull off the shit that we pull off. Nothing on paper. Yet we keep doing it. So what is that? And I think that for people is this like, wait a second. And I always joke about this, but it's like, wait, if that dumb bald guy can do it, and for the listeners out there, I'm dumb and bald. If he can do it, then maybe I can do it too. And I think that acts as this moment of inspiration for people.
What's the team that you have now look like? And are you starting to enroll and recruit people that have heard about it? I got to imagine you're starting to expand and grow as you start to get more and
I mean,
more.
this is where the producer thing comes back in.
Yeah.
If I said, all right, man, here's the deal. Jamie, I want you to produce a science fiction film. Go. What are you going to do? You're going to go find people who have an expertise in science fiction films,
true, yes.
right?
Yeah.
And I go, wait. You know what? Cancel that. And you got the crew. You're ready to go. We start shooting them. I'm like, Jamie, here's the deal, dude. Script change. It's now a Western. Is that same team going to be the team that you're going to work with? Probably not. You're going to probably go get someone else. So the brilliant thing about what we do is that a producer finds horses for courses, and they find, if we need a nuclear physicist, we'll find that particular person. But we don't have a massive staff of experts because it depends every year, depends on the different things that we're going to work on. So most of my team is project management, it's storytelling, it's oversight, and it's just scrappy people who are able to build teams. But the true brilliance of the teams that we build are acquired through people who believe in the cause of what we're up to.
Amazing. What is next? What are you excited about next? What's the next project for Not Impossible, or the next iteration of Not Impossible potentially? What are you looking forward to?
So, and I'll talk a little bit about this tomorrow, but I have been obsessed with this concept of food insecurity.
Food insecurity.
Mm-hmm. Which just sounds like, what does that mean? Is that just being hungry?
That was my next question.
Yeah, it's like, was that just being hungry?
Sure.
So food insecurity means of 21 meals a week, 3 meals a day, 7 days a week, maybe you got 15, maybe you got 14, right? So you've got enough to stay alive, but you're constantly stressed about where your next meal is going to come from. There's uncertainty. Every day you wake up, and maybe you wake up and you're hungry because you didn't eat the night before, you didn't eat that day. 50 million people in this country are food insecure, right? Now, just for comparison and just for data's sake, 650,000 people in this country are homeless. So think about that spectrum.
It's a big gap.
It's a massive gap, right? You're talking about 0.5%, based on this. Did I do the math right on that one?
I think so. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'm not good at math.
Sorry.
I'm not great at math.
I told you. There's a dumb ball guy.
Another one right here.
So we then started to look at this and go, well, wait a second, what does food insecurity mean? And it means that these people are on the hustle, right? You're from Michigan, right?
Yeah.
These are people that are working on the assembly line. These are people that are constantly out there. Maybe they got multiple jobs. They've got kids there, but they're constantly worried about where the next meal is going to come from. I think you probably heard the statistic that, there's a massive population of our country that are $700 away from being homeless.
Yeah.
You're constantly on that, having to refill the glass before it all runs out, and so that stress leads to a lot of health issues. Yeah. There's a lot of chronic conditions that relate or that come out of that, and so we started seeing all these correlations, and we're like, wait a second, we live in one of the most prosperous, most incredible countries in the world, and there's a lot of amazing countries, a lot of first world countries. How could this be? This is just not right. And what we realized, it's a supply chain issue. There's plenty of food. There's plenty of people who need the food, but we're not connecting the dots. Yeah. So we said, all right, we're going to do something about this. So we started to obsess about it and kind of go through the typical process. We started to talk to people, interview people. And what we realized was that when we started interviewing people, and we've interviewed homeless kids in Venice Beach, where I'm from, and we asked them, what's the one thing that you prize most? What's the one thing that you want more than anything? What would you think that they would answer?
If they're homeless, for me, it would be shelter, a home.
Or what else? Give me some other things you're thinking of.
Yeah, food, stability, love, connection, all of that stuff.
Survey says,
Really?
You know what they wanted?
No.
A cell phone.
No kidding.
Why? Why do you think they'd want a cell phone?
Connection, I suppose.
Bam, you just nailed it.
Right?
The cell phone doesn't know where you slept last night. It doesn't know that your shoes are all tattered and torn. It doesn't know that you slept outside. It doesn't know what your color your skin is, who you sleep with, who you pray to. It is this equalizer, and it's this communication tool. So it blew us away. Most people wouldn't think that, as this situation exemplifies. And so we went, all right, wow, there's something there. And then we did the study, we started that. 96% of the people in this country have a cell phone. There's not 96% of us in this country that have any similarities except for maybe breathing air and pumping blood. Right. And the next thing is probably a cell phone, right? Yeah. So we went, all right, let's exploit that commonality, that unifying data point, and figure out what we could do with that. So after a lot of research and a lot of prototyping, and there's a lot of funny stories in some of the stuff that we tried, we ended up creating this text-based solution, not an app, because how many times have you texted today?
Oh, God.
Tons, right?
My thumbs hurt, yeah.
How many times have you been on every one of the apps on your phone?
Never.
Never, right?
Yeah.
App adoption is a really difficult thing. And if you're food insecure, the last thing you need is some complicated app where you got to put in a bunch of information. So we made it text because it's a minimum viable product, lowest common denominator. It's what we call frictionless. That's a really key thing in terms of how we operate. We're constantly looking for frictionless innovation, frictionless solutions. So we created a text-based solution that deploys on the side of the organization who owns that constituency of people. So if it's the Boys and Girls Club, then they know all of the kids in their community who are food insecure, and the families are food insecure. They've spent their lives, the people at that Boys and Girls Club, and the management and in the running of the operations, they know those families. They know the struggle there. So they're now able to assign this number. They can basically say to a mom and dad, they can say, hey, if you guys need a meal, we're gonna pick up the tab on you getting a meal. You just have to text this number. And so here's the brilliant thing about it. All the person has to do on that side is text the word order. Then it creates a chat bot, right? And the next thing that pops up is it says, great, are you still at the address that you were? 1 for yes, 2 for no, yes. Okay, next thing that pops up is a list of restaurants that are geo-proximate to them, that are close to them. So let's say they choose number 3, which is Dave's Deli, right? They choose Dave's Deli. Then the next list is the number of the menu items. And it gives them 5 menu items that we have curated automatically. We've scraped all the data off the web. We've scraped it, and now it offers them the best and most nutritious offering from that menu item, because we want to make sure we're putting good fuel in the tank. Because a lot of people are food insecure, eating crap food that they get off the bottom shelf of the grocery store, right? Sure. So now they've been able, we say, great, now you get to go into the restaurant and pick it up. And when they walk in, they don't walk in as Jamie, the person who can't afford to feed his family. Jamie, the person who's struggling, who's only eating 14 meals this week instead of 21. You just walk in as Jamie, and you walk in, and I'm in front of you, and I say, hey, my name's Mick. And they're like, oh, here you go, Mick, here's your burrito. Yeah. And then you walk in, and you say, hi, my name's Jamie. And they're like, here you go, Jamie, here's your burrito. That's it. And then you walk out. So we've fed you conveniently. We've done it with in a nutritious way, and we've done it with dignity. Yeah. Because now you get to walk in and walk out as Jamie, not as the person who's food insecure. So that was our whole premise, right? And we launched that at the beginning of the pandemic because we said there's too many kids that are going to be losing their free and reduced meals. Schools are closing. Everything's closing. World's closing down. We got to make sure people don't go hungry. Well, a funny thing happened. All of a sudden, we started seeing adoption rates of this thing, 95% adoption rates. You don't get 95% adoption rates of anything. Oh, right. And we went, holy cow. And then we started, people were texting us back. And so we were having these dialogues, these conversations with this population of people who are constantly on the hustle, but they're moving and they're really difficult to get a hold of. And what we realized is that in using food as that engagement, vehicle, we created this engagement platform now that is unheard of in terms of how you can create communication channels with an at-risk, very difficult to communicate with population. Well, then we backed that out and realized, what is the one industry that has the most to gain, that has the largest budget and has the most to gain and loses the most amount of money on this population? It's healthcare. The two biggest budgets in the world are healthcare and military, right? Yeah. So we have now begun working with healthcare companies, and our whole point is, if you feed people, you can make things, you can create intrinsic contingencies to things where you can say, hey, listen, Jamie, we've been feeding you for about a month or so. We need you to go to the doctor's office. If you want to stay on the program, if you want to unlock your next months of meals, you got to go to the doctor's office. Do you know how valuable that is to a healthcare company?
Yeah.
Because the healthcare company, especially in the Medicaid population,
Sure.
they have to keep you healthy.
Yeah.
If they don't keep you healthy, it costs them thousands and thousands of dollars. Do you know what you do if you're on Medicaid? Typically, statistically,
Yeah.
if you get a sniffle, do you know where you go?
I don't know, the ER?
ER.
Yeah.
Do you know how much an ER visit costs?
No, probably a lot.
So now we've realized if we can just get you to, instead of going to the ER, we're going to get you to go to the doctor's office because you want to keep eating. We've now saved $15,000 to that healthcare company. If we can get you, if you're a diabetic, if we can get you eating meals that's the easiest way. I don't know if you have any friends or family that are diabetic. What's the easiest way to abate diabetes?
Yeah.
Eat well.
Yeah. Oh, fair. Right. Yeah.
You just eat well.
Yeah.
Just don't eat shit food.
Yeah.
So the whole reason that people are taking insulin and doing things like that is because the levels go up. If you eat healthy, then all of a sudden you're able to keep it at bay. We can create that contingency if you want to stay in the program. This is the food you're going to eat. So we basically have realized that in our desire of feeding a food insecure population, we actually have created this health tool for healthcare companies to try to keep this population in mass, keep them healthier. Now all of a sudden you're talking about changing lives, right? Now you're talking about changing families. You're giving people this sense of stability. The stress is gone, and they're making them, and there you have healthier communities.
Where is this right now?
We've got 10 different pilot cities. We're about 18 months old. 10 different pilot cities, some of the big cities, obviously. And we fed about, in our first kind of pilot phase, we fed over 200,000 meals.
Wow. What do you see what's the panacea with this?
Panacea is that right now, every person on Medicaid now through the company, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with how Medicaid and Medicare works, but the Medicaid population, they're on SNAP. They're like, there's organizations that are responsible for managing them, and it's a massive industry as well in terms of trying to deal with them, but you can't wrangle this population that's hard to interface with. It's hard to get them to communicate with you. So what we're now able to do, the panacea of this, is that every person in the country who's food insecure has access to this through their healthcare provider, and in doing so, we get them off of the program. That's the craziest thing. So if you're an entrepreneur listening to this right now, here's the crazy thing. The panacea is that we eliminate food insecurity in this country, and everybody now can just go back to their world, and they can work, and they can pay taxes, and they can pay their rent, and they can just have a balanced and stable life. That's kind of the dream. That's the dream that we have.
No, that makes sense. I interviewed a prior guest. She's on our women's division of GoBundance, and she went through, just an incredible upbringing, a lot of abuse, insecurity in many different ways because of that. And one of the things you talked about, going in and being able to get a meal and get it with dignity, she described that as far as going from like low-income housing into what was assisted housing. Like but it wasn't dubbed as that. She was getting assistance, but it wasn't viewed as that. Like, you live in that place. Confidence was something that she said was the big builder on that, which really launched her to be where she is now. Very successful, multiple streams of income, owns a couple schools. I think that's one of the things too that really comes from this is you go in with dignity. That's a component.
Man, you nailed it. Dignity is everything. There's a friend of ours who his company's about to go public, right? This is an amazing story. He grew up sleeping in his car with his mom. His mom had a drug problem, so he and his brother slept in cars. They slept on friends' couches. He played baseball on his team because the baseball team would have lunch every day. And he hates baseball. He ended up being so good, he went to college. It never stopped his hatred for baseball, but it gave him the ability to eat, right? He told stories about, he knew a couple other kids who were in the same circumstance as him, and they would look out for each other because there was different lines that you could go through at the cafeteria, and they would kind of keep point, and then people would go through it so that none of the other kids would be able to see it. Dignity is one of those things where once you give that back to people or give people the option of that, all of a sudden you have a loyalty that is, you can't even measure it. So the story that you're telling about this woman makes total sense, and we get that coming back to us all the time. Not just the fact that I got a chance to eat, and not just the fact that it was convenient, but the fact that I just got to walk in like everybody else. That moment of dignity is more powerful quite possibly than the actual food they're putting in their belly.
Incredible, man! You got me a little bit emotional on this. It's insane, and your power of the ability to enroll. Like I'm in. Like if I had any knowledge on what to do here, I would absolutely be in.
Here, let me finish. I'll tell you, that buddy of mine who is about to go public, he's gonna be a very, very, very wealthy person.
Sure.
I said, "What are you gonna do?" He goes, "I'm gonna buy a boat." And I said, "What are you gonna name the boat?" And without hesitating, he goes, "It's gonna be called No More Baseball."
Oh, wow. Yeah. Hates it that much.
Well, now it's like he doesn't have to.
Right.
you know,
Right.
so,
Good for him.
yeah.
Incredible, man. I think we're up on time here, or pretty close. So we'll wrap it up here. You're speaking tomorrow night at this event. Can you give me a little preview? What do you plan to kind of dive into?
I'm going to talk a lot about what we just talked about. I'll talk a little bit about the origin of Not Impossible with the EyeWriter, and then the progress into Project Daniel. And I'm going to talk about Bento and the work that we're doing with Bento. And if you're interested in learning more about Bento, go to gobento.com.
Gobento.com.
And if you want more about Not Impossible Labs, go to notimpossible.com.
Beautiful. Anywhere to follow you, social handles, anything like that?
Yeah, everything's at Not Impossible. That's where you can find us.
Beautiful. Mick, man, this is amazing. I appreciate you being on.
Thanks a lot.
All right, brother.
Cheers.
All right, thank you. Wow. Yeah.